Welcome to the Money Huddle, a podcast that explores financial topics for families and small business owners. Hosted by Michael Baker and Ross Marinell. All opinions expressed by Michael and Ross or any podcast guests are solely their own opinions and may not reflect the opinions of Planners Alliance. The podcast recording is for informational purposes only and should not be relied upon for investment decisions. Clients of Planners Alliance may maintain positions in securities discussed on the program.
Welcome back to the Money Huddle. Ross, how you doing this morning?
I'm doing wonderful. How are you today, Michael?
Doing awesome. So I hear there is a very newly minted, is it millionaire or billionaire?
Multimillionaire.
Multimillionaire. A cat? Tell me about it.
That's right. So this past week, the fashion world lost an icon, Karl Lagerfeld, designer for Chanel and other wonderful places, passed away.
Like, who is this guy? I don't know.
But what was I thought fascinating, he had amassed somewhere between $195 million and $300 million in net worth,
right?
Which has been passed into his estate, and the heiress of his estate is his beloved cat, Choupette.
His cat, Choupette.
So apparently, because he's
was
German,
this intentional?
This was planned, and apparently this is legal. In Germany, I'm not familiar with the German estate plan laws, but
right.
It sounds like this is going to happen. So I thought this would be an interesting time to just talk a little bit about inheritance and what that means.
So I'm guessing he left it in like a trust, and the beneficiary of the trust is the cat.
Listen, this cat
or help me out
has had a wonderful life. It eats on fine silverware,
the
finest
china.
But is going to get to continue that wonderful
lifestyle.
existence and lifestyle, even though Karl Lagerfeld has passed away.
Does the cat have a guardian? Did they name a guardian? Because that might be a pretty cush job for the guardian.
I have so many questions. Who helps the cat manage the estate? I don't know. There's going to have to be a trustee involved.
There's got to. I mean, who's going to make sure that Choupette, because I don't think she can go. It's a she, right? Is it a she cat? We don't know.
I don't know.
There's so many questions. But apparently, Choupette is the world's newest multimillionaire, and she needs help because there's going to have to be people, help her do simple things like, I don't know, get money out of an account and buy her cat food.
We've seen some pretty wacky estate issues recently with some of the famous artists and musicians that have passed away. This one, for me, took the cake.
Yeah.
And I thought, though, it was interesting because we do come across quite often folks that are receiving a little less inheritance than maybe $195 million, but ultimately
a tad bit less.
A very meaningful inheritance for their family. And some of the kind of basic guidelines that we usually suggest to folks when they're receiving inheritance assets. And so one of those, Michael, is we obviously want to know what type of asset we're inheriting.
Well, yeah. I mean, I think, one of the things that happens for a lot of folks sometimes is when they do inherit money. Well, the first thing, I don't know off the top of my head, but I'm sure we could find a study. I suspect that the majority of inheritance money does not last very long. Right?
Well,
people tend to blow through that, right? And in fact, actually, it was interesting. One of the articles I was going to talk about today was this article that was written by, it was in Harper's Bazaar, and it was talking about. We'll get to it in a minute, but it was talking about getting financial help from your parents, and why people should be more open about what that is. The reasoning behind it is pretty lame, but the idea was that a lot of people get help from their parents, and I think that there was a quote in there that said that the average, and of course there's they're breaking it down by race, but I think they said like the average inheritance for white families was around $100,000. And then for African American families, it was around $40,000, and they were illustrating like a wealth gap effect there. But
right.
I think that one of the first things is when people inherit money, is there's a lot of it puts gasoline on bad financial habits. right? We get tempted to go and do a lot of things that may not be the best thing simply because, we have this newfound wealth. Let's go do X, Y, and Z.
It's a shock to the financial system if you're not used, if it's an inheritance amount that's more than what you may be comfortable managing or have been used to managing, and then you have this infusion of inheritance money, it can find a quick to-do list because there may be a pecking order of things that you prioritize as a family. It could be paying down student loan debt. It could be paying off auto loans. It could be taking, hopefully infusing some money into some savings accounts. But it can definitely find its way out of the checking account that it's received in pretty quickly.
Oh, no question. So I think, like you said at the very beginning, if you do inherit money, one of the few things, first of all, there's rules that you have to be aware of, especially if you inherit something like an IRA or a 401k or qualified retirement money. You need to know and understand the rules of how that inheritance is going to work. Believe it or not, there are people out there that don't realize that you have to pay taxes on stuff like that. So there's also, if you inherit property or you inherit a real asset, you need to know how the basis rules work. Like if you're going to get a step up in the basis on the tax value, or if your mom and dad did some nifty planning where you may not get a step up in basis. I mean, we've seen in the past, we've seen cases where there's been trusts that have done, and the assets inside of the trust don't necessarily qualify for a step up in basis because of some of the planning that the parents did. So it's important to know the rules. What I typically like to say, and that is, one of the things that we find a lot of times in people's lives is when there's a turning point, hence part of the name of our company,
Mm-hmm.
when there's a life change, something like marriage, new kids, losing a spouse, getting a second marriage, buying a home, moving, any of these big life events typically are a great time to reevaluate your finances and what you're doing. So I would definitely say inheriting money or knowing you're going to inherit some money is a triggering event to reach out to a qualified, financial professional and say, hey, I'm about to inherit some money. I really don't want to mess this up. Can you give me some advice on what I should do? Right.
And our pecking order, of course, is first understand what the asset is that you're inheriting. So if it is like you said, a tax deferred, a traditional IRA, a traditional 401k, from a non-spouse. So if you're inheriting that, let's say from a parent who passed away,
right,
and that becomes a quote unquote, becomes a beneficiary IRA, you need to start taking required minimum distributions. So that's an important thing to get counseling on, because if you don't start distributing that properly, there could be tax consequences down the road.
Right.
If you're receiving a non-retirement account, so something that's after tax, like you said, that may qualify for a stepped-up cost basis, which could greatly reduce some capital gains taxes and income taxes that you might owe. That could be a source of helping get some of those maybe pressing bills or expenses paid.
Sure.
Versus using tax-deferred assets. So those are some things to point out. I also want to talk just a little bit on this subject of inheriting annuities, because I think more people down the road are going to be doing that.
Possibly, yeah.
And if it is a qualified annuity, so an IRA, so a traditional IRA, it's going to follow the same rules as inheriting
an IRA is an IRA.
IRA is an IRA. But if it is a non-qualified annuity, then there are some unique tax circumstances to that. And before you just pull the trigger and say, hey, I want to receive this, just send it to my checking account, be careful to understand what your cost basis is and what the gain is.
Again, yeah. So I go back to like the very, that triggering event, knowing that you're going to inherit some money, just about everything that is, got some type of account, with a custodian, be it an IRA, be it non-qualified money, be it an annuity contract, be it life insurance, just about everything is going to require paperwork. Before you pass go on that, get some help, because you could literally shoot yourself in the foot and cost yourself thousands. Real quick story on that. Several years ago, before this lady started working with me, she called me and said, hey, I lost my husband. I want to come in and speak with you. But before she did that, she had actually rolled out the pension, the husband's pension. She asked that they contacted her, and she had them send her the check. So she took a pension, which would be qualified retirement dollars, a couple $100,000, and just took the check, like took a check of that.
Right.
So that immediately became taxable, and she paid through the teeth on that. So these are the kind of things we want to avoid. That's why it's important to reach out to a financial pro.
And so one of the overarching guidelines we have is just take a deep breath.
Yeah.
Because it is an emotional time. It's a unique financial circumstance. Just take a deep breath and
Well, if
process
you're
what you
shoepet,
want
it
to
could
do.
be a
So
wonderful
that was kind
time.
of what I was going to say. Listen, shoepet, don't make any knee-jerk decisions. Let's not go overboard
Can
here.
we go
No,
be
you got a lot of
Shoepet's family office? Like we'll work. I'll make sure she gets the best. What's it? Cat food. You know, absolutely. All right. So I saw another article in Bloomberg recently. Came out about a couple days ago, and it said that millennials are facing $1 trillion in debt. It says student loans obviously make up the majority of the debt for 19 to 29-year-olds. But what I thought was crazy was it says since 2009. So we tend to think, once you go to college, you get out of school, you find a job, the goal or the idea is you want to eventually, find a home, start, and we know that people rent and do things. But what was interesting to me was it says since 2009, mortgage debt was actually only up 3.2%, but student loan debt had increased 102%. So, your run-of-the-mill mortgage debt has only increased by 3.2%, but since 2009, student loan debt has increased by 102%.
So I think this is what I'm a little nervous about. Obviously, we know the student loan debt is there. The cost of college has been exploding over the last 15 years. What's scary is the mortgage debt hasn't kicked in yet. But at some point, as these, younger generation gets married, starts to have a family, is that mortgage debt going to come in and really become even more burdensome, right?
Yeah.
The mortgage debt hasn't really kicked in yet for a lot of these folks because they may be trying to live as cheaply as possible, right? Finding rent options versus just going and putting a big down payment on a home and getting in over their head on mortgage debt. But is that still coming on the horizon?
Well, I think so. I mean, I think that's what most folks generally, is typically the life path. Is you go to college, graduate school. If you don't find your future spouse in college, you hopefully are searching for that one person, but you get married, and then when you start a family, unless you live in a large metropolitan area, a lot of people want to live in a home. They don't want to live in an apartment, especially don't want to raise kids in an apartment, unless that's what you have to do. And there's nothing wrong with that, but I think that's the natural progression. A lot of people want to own property. And so the way you typically do that is you take on a mortgage. But what was interesting, it says here that, obviously, and this is kind of intuitive, but it's, basically the article is talking about how the amount of debt is really weighing on the spending for that cohort. Like they can't spend as much money,
right?
Because they are saddled with debt, and it's impacting their ability to go out and get these mortgages because they're so leveraged, and at least right now, they haven't relaxed the lending standards so much that they're just allowing people to take on mortgages like they were pre-financial crisis, where if you could fog a mirror and you had a pulse, you could get a loan.
Right, getting a mortgage loan's gotten more challenging for sure since the mid 2000s, and it's interesting to see what's going to happen. I know you had a stat too that some of the student loan debt, the delinquency rates are starting to pick up too.
Yes, so on the same vein. The total outstanding student loan debt is probably around 1.5 trillion, but there's now data coming in that says about 166 billion of that debt is now 90 days delinquent, which means that they haven't been paying. Or have not been able to pay, and there was an article by Zero Hedge talking about this as well. Let me see the actual title. It says, 166 billion in student loan debt is now officially delinquent, and that's according to the Federal Reserve Bank of New York's latest quarterly household debt report. So,
which is a little over 11% of the debt. So just think
Right.
1 in 10. 1 in 10 is over 90 days delinquent on student loan debt.
Exactly. And, well, if you have to factor in that, I would say the majority of these student loans are federally backed loans, right? A good portion of them are backed up. And so, are we possibly going to a tipping point where there's going to have to be some type of government intervention or bailout? Because I think, at least politically, we're starting to see some of that conversation bubble to the surface about how punitive some of these student loans are. And we've seen some of the interest rates that these loans charge people.
I think this is something that needs to be touched on a little bit, because if we just lump student loan debt together, I think most of our listeners might think, well, isn't that pretty affordable? Isn't a student loan a pretty low interest debt? And the reality is some are, right? The federal student loan programs are actually pretty reasonable. They still may be above some of the mortgage debts rates that are out there, but it's reasonable. You're in the 4.5% to 5% range. The challenge is you get some of these private student loan debts that will allow you to borrow more money in some cases. We have seen student loan debts in the double digits. So think about a 24-year-old recent graduate who has $30,000 or $40,000 in student loan debt at 10 or 11%.
Right.
It's a burden.
It's crazy.
It's a burden. And as we know, it's near impossible to discharge from bankruptcy, to be forgiven from this loan. So ultimately, at some point,
stuck with
someone's going to pay the piper.
Right. And so that's, I think, a real concern here. And I'm just noting here in this article with Zero Hedge, it says that echoing back what they first said in 2012, Bloomberg notes the total amount in arrears, I'm guessing these student loans in arrears, total amount in arrears is twice the amount that the U.S. Treasury paid to bail out the auto industry during the last recession. So we're talking about some big numbers.
It's
kind of scary.
That's scary. And when we had the obviously the great financial crisis, 0809, a lot of emphasis was put on bailing out the banks, not necessarily the homeowners, right, that were underwater on their loans. I hope whatever the resolution is, that we're not bailing out student loan carriers versus helping these young people.
Hopefully we help the people.
Hopefully we help the people.
Not the people who made bad loans.
That's right.
Yeah, well, I think, my take on it is this. What I would really like to see, I would like to see everybody come to the table on this, because I've seen where there's been some talk about employers offering, as an incentive to come and work there, like that the employer will help pay off the student loan. There's a lot of programs. I know there's programs that offer loan forgiveness if you go and work in, like maybe the nonprofit sector, or you work in the public sector for a certain period of time. There'll be some loan forgiveness, and I love to see innovative solutions like that versus the idea is like, oh, this is just ballooned up out of control, and now the government needs to step in and basically bail out bad behavior.
Right, because what's happening now is not the solution, which is basically as the cost of college increases and steps up, basically the increase in student loan debt is just almost in lockstep.
Oh yeah.
If you go back to the late 1990s to today, it is just an escalating, it's just a straight line.
Yeah.
And it's scary to see that as the cost of college has gone up, the way we've been funding it is by increased student loan borrowing, and we've got to have a better solution than that.
I agree. And I mean, so hopefully, like I said, this does not manifest itself into some desperate decisions, because when people get desperate, because you think, you graduate school, you think you're going to get, for some reason, folks are still thinking they're going to graduate and they're going to walk right into a $60,000 a year job, but they're having to get basically, starting salary pay. And then it's like, well, I want to have a home, or I don't want to live at home with my mom and dad, or, how do I save for retirement? Everyone says save for retirement, but I can't do all that because I have, these massive student loan debts, and then I have to eat and I have to do other things. So hopefully they'll find some innovative solutions. This is definitely something we're going to be keeping our eyes on, especially as we move into the next political cycle, because I think this is going to be a major, with the millennial cohort being as large as it is, I think it's going to be a major talking point moving forward.
Right. And I hope we don't just end up in some political standoff where we're just pointing fingers at each other.
Oh,
and
come on. You know we're going to
something.
point fingers. That's what politics is these days. All right. So another article I found that I thought was neat, and it was touching on a few things. Of course, if you're on Twitter at all, especially FinTwit, financial Twitter, it's tax season right now. So we got a lot of CPAs on there, a lot of tax professionals, financial planners that are talking through, they're hearing people talking about the size of their refund. Their size of their refund from the IRS. And apparently a lot of people are a little bit disappointed this year because their refund isn't as large as they had anticipated. It's shrunk. And so, Ben Carlson, wrote a nice article that says, "What's up with my tax refund?" And basically the idea that Ben was putting out is that, the tax code changed. So this is the first year everyone's filing under the new tax code. And with the tax code change, a lot of people saw a bump in their paycheck because the withholding rates changed, and a lot of employers automatically did that. So you saw your paycheck adjust accordingly, and there was less withholding done. And so, when it comes time to get your taxes reconciled, you didn't pay as much, so you are getting a smaller refund, and people are tripping out because they're like, wait a minute, I'm supposed to get a larger refund. And I just thought it was hilarious that in this day and age, people still have not taken the time to figure out that a tax refund, that's nothing to be excited about.
Well,
what are your thoughts?
People are, if they're used to getting it, then they're kind of earmarking and counting it. What it was really important to analyze is how much total tax did you pay? Because what the reality is, your refund may be less at the end of the year when you file your tax returns, but you may be getting more into your bank account through each paycheck. And so what I would encourage people to do is go back and calculate your total tax paid under this tax rules versus the old tax rules and see, did you really receive a benefit? Listen, some people aren't.
Well, yeah.
Some people aren't. And it's going to be interesting to see when, the state and local tax deduction caps kick in.
Yeah.
And it is going to have some negative effect on some higher income earners for sure. But, for people earning a pretty standard income, you're probably going to see a little bit of a less tax paid, but it doesn't mean your refund's going to be bigger.
No, I think, I agree with that. I think, though, one of the big points that is being made is just that we still have a lot of folks that, and I understand some people they just feel like they can't save, but all the refund was the return of your money that you overpaid to the federal government throughout the year, and they're just giving it back to you as an interest-free loan to the government. They're giving it back. It's a way of forced savings, and I know a lot of people, they rely on those. I've heard stories where they rely on those refunds because they're going to pay their credit cards off, or they're going to pay, off the family vacation, or they're going to take the family vacation with that money. And to me, it's always like, wouldn't you rather save that money throughout the year? And, because I would say that the majority of people, the way a lot of people pay their taxes, they're W-2. So they get their paycheck and the taxes are withheld from their paycheck. Well, if you're getting a massive refund, your paychecks throughout the year are smaller than they could be because you're paying more in taxes throughout the year. Wouldn't it be nicer to have a larger paycheck throughout the year?
Maybe that's a forced savings account for some people, that at the end of the year they get their tax refund and they didn't spend it throughout. It's possible that it's harder to notice that incremental increase in a paycheck versus getting that lump sum.
That large lump sum. So at any rate, we definitely think that one of the things that folks need to really, we believe that financial education is important. I really believe that we as financial professionals, we are going to have to step up our game because the stuff I still see about taxes is mind blowing when it comes to just people don't understand even like the basics of how they work.
Right. So when you read the headline says I got a lower tax refund, it doesn't mean anything.
Yeah.
You have to look at the total tax that you paid.
Correct.
Period.
So that's it. And, it's a lot of stuff happening right now. I mean, obviously we're in the middle of tax season, so I'm sure we're going to see some additional stuff that comes out. But one of the things we definitely want to keep our eye on are these student loans and, how, our political leaders, how private businesses, companies, try to innovate and figure out, because I think this is a real burden. This is going to be a real issue, and this is, I think, beginning to be the culmination of years and years of that easy access to student loan money to go do whatever you want. The combination of, we talked about in some of our previous discussions where, a 4-year degree isn't really a 4-year degree. It's now like an average 5 years plus to get a 4-year degree. So there's a lot of factors that are playing into that. And as a lot of baby boomers retire and they go on to, hopefully they go on to their retirement income plans where they're planning to spend, but they're not planning to be crazy, and they're not raising children anymore. They're not putting kids through college. I think our economy is going to need some of these millennials to be consuming and spending so that the economy can still grow, and these student loans could be hindering that.
It's going to be interesting to see what the effect is on housing and other consumer spending down the road.
Absolutely. So anyway, thank you for tuning into the show. If you like what you heard, don't forget to hit that subscribe button, and we will see you or talk to you next time.